Welcome to Chem 353 or 354. This introductory presentation substitutes for what we would normally do if we were allowed to meet in person as a group. So in this presentation, we'll go over both the syllabus and the check-in process. And in doing so, we'll also talk about the COVID-19 policies that will allow us to conduct this lab as safely as possible. Be sure to watch the entire presentation. There will be a point somewhere within it where you're asked to take an image of the screen and also an image of yourself, and to combine those two images into a single document that you can then submit on Learning Suite for credit for having viewed this presentation in its entirety. I want to start off this presentation by helping you become familiar with the Learning Suite site that we've put together. Here you'll find under the Home tab, assignments, announcements, and other options that you can use, as well as emailing options. You'll want to check these routinely to make sure that you're current on any announcements. We often put important links and other information here that we see that is necessary as the semester moves along. Under the assignments button, you'll find each of the due dates and assignments in a description. It's here also that you'll submit any documentation to complete an assignment for grading. Also, if you're not aware, you can email students or the TAs from this part of Learning Suite if you have questions or need to contact them. Under the Content tab, we find several important documents that you'll need to be familiar with. Under Course Information, we find the syllabus, and we'll go over that shortly. Later, after the TAs have been completely assigned and had an opportunity to set office hours, we'll have a document here that will give all TA office hours, not just for your section, but for all sections that are taught, and the times that they will be holding their Zoom meetings. We will restrict interactions with you and TAs to Zoom meetings, but you can talk to any TA using this document that will appear. Under course documents, we'll list the different experiments that you'll perform in the laboratory. And so these will show up as needed. So currently we have the first two experiments loaded up, and as the semester goes along, all of them will appear here. This introductory presentation and a link to it will eventually be added here as it is finished. Now under miscellaneous, we have some fairly important documents, an example of a write-up, the reaction summary sheet, the spectroscopy packet that you can also buy at the bookstore. It can be downloaded here, so you could potentially just download it and print it out, and some generic sheets if you find yourself in a jam and you need to download it in order to complete an assignment. You can find those here. Let's take a minute now and move through the syllabus that we can find under the Syllabus tab in Learning Suite. This tab has certain items that are highlighted in yellow that I find particularly important or think are particularly important that you should be able to find easily. This syllabus applies both to Chem 353 and 354, and many of the items that are listed in this syllabus address the COVID-19 situation that we're currently experiencing. Now, as far as this course is concerned, there is a prerequisite. You need to have completed Chem 351 in order to take it, and at least be concurrently enrolled in Chem 352 in most cases. There are some majors that don't require Chem 352, but that do require at least 1 credit of Chem 353, and that's perfectly acceptable. Now, the required materials here that are listed should be easily affordable. The laboratory techniques manual has been out since 2014, so there's probably plenty of used copies online, but the bookstore does carry it. The organic chemistry lab notebook is one that is custom developed and will only be available through the bookstore. So you want to pick one up there. It's about $15. It has special foldouts that we'll use that are designed with our lab in mind. The spectroscopy packet is one that you can buy at the bookstore for a minimal price. It's really just for convenience. You can also download those documents from Learning Suite if you desire and print them off at home. Now we'll also need a lab coat, splash guard goggles, and a face mask that we wear 100% of the time in the laboratory. I have an image here of those items. The laboratory techniques manual here you see on the left is the blue of the 4th edition. Earlier editions are red. I don't believe that you'll be able to get a hold of any earlier editions, so you want to probably exclusively look at the 2014 edition or the 4th edition. The laboratory notebook is rather generic. It's simply the foldouts that are customized, but you'll want to have one of those. And then the goggles and lab coat you can buy at the Nichols building, which is the building attached directly to the north end of the central wing of the Benson building. And these can be purchased probably for $20 or $25, not each, but combined. And this particular type of goggle is the one that you want. It's designed to fit snug up against your forehead and cheekbones so that any chemical splashes don't run into your eyes. The course objectives you can read for yourselves, but basically they're laid out this way to help you understand that the purpose of Chem 353 or 354 is to allow you to become proficient enough with the different techniques and activities that take place in a traditional organic research lab, so that if you are choose to or asked to work in that type of environment, that you'll understand from the get-go after completing this course what they're doing, and to be able to contribute with minimal training. Now this next section deals with some policies relating to attendance, coming to lab prepared, and cleaning our lab stations. You need to be aware that you are only allowed to attend the lab station for which you are enrolled. And it's important for you to become accustomed to checking announcements before you come to lab, in case there's any emergency plans or items that change that we're trying to make you aware of. Now, normally we would meet in a classroom and have lecture before going to lab. We cannot do that under the current situation. So what we've done is create online videos that incorporate the lecture that we would ordinarily have, along with a run through of the experiment. And that is how we have chosen to help you to get prepared for a lab. So we'll do the ordinary things and then also watch the video in place of meeting together for a lecture. And that standardizes our experience. You're also required to watch this video before you're starting an experiment, and we'll leave that to your honor, but you'll definitely want to watch it, as it gives you not only good advice about what's going to happen during the experiment, but many of the test questions that you'll have on both the midterm and final are addressed in the lectures in some way or form. Now, to avoid point deductions for late work, you must, or leaving late, you must leave by 10 minutes to the top of the last hour of your session. This is so that any students that are planning on coming in and starting right when their section starts, that follows yours, we don't have to mix with you necessarily. We can keep proper social distancing. You also need to become aware that you need to clean your station after each experiment. And there will be spray bottles and paper towels located in the lab that you should identify, but make the habit of cleaning not only the countertop but all of the equipment and even the glass canopy that surrounds your station before you leave. Now you're encouraged to leave early if you can, because the lecture portion is now involved or incorporated into online videos. We don't need to take up any of our 3-hour block doing that. And so you'll have more time potentially to do your experiment. And if you do finish early, go ahead and leave. There's no problem. You don't have to stay the entire time. As far as excused absences or late work is concerned, if you need to miss a lab for any reason, whether that be COVID-19 related or you have a medical school interview or whatever, you need to get permission by email from your instructor before that lab period begins in order to make it up without penalty. Now, when submitting work, if it's late or you've missed a lab and you're making it up, you need to submit that work with a dated copy of the email response that we give back to you. And you use that as the cover page. That way a TA understands that what you're turning in is work that you did not do in person. You simply filled out the work, watched the online video, and used the data that is found in that video in order to complete the lab as if you had collected that yourself. Now, there are certain deductions for not following this policy, and you can read through them there and make yourself aware. And this applies to all types of excused absences. Now, this next section called the write-up workflow is one that I wrote to try to help you or orient you in terms of what you should do. Now, eventually, after you've done a few experiments, this will become second nature, so you probably only have to refer to this on the first few experiments. But the first step that you should do is go ahead and study the experiment and complete any associated reading assignments. Now you can find the documents for each experiment under course documents. So let's go back to Learning Suite. And we find under course documents, we have experiments. Here, and I'll click on that. And this first experiment we're going to do is called the Fisher Esterification Lab. And that's why this is labeled FE. If I download that, I see this format sheet with items that are highlighted in red that I need to do before I start an experiment, before I show up to the lab and get things going. Those things highlighted in bold are ones that I'll do during the experiment or after the experiment. Notice that the procedure that you're going to follow isn't one that's written out for you ahead of time. Now, in the experiment down below, we'll have a background about the Fisher Esterification Lab, different reading assignments, and they're highlighted here. So Technique 7.1 is Chapter 7, Section 1 of the Techniques Manual. You read through those items to understand different terms. And eventually you'll get through all that and through the table and come to a procedure. That procedure is fairly lengthy and has material that you probably don't need to write down in your notebook, but that is helpful. You'll read through this and then condense it into your own words in your notebook, and then follow your own procedure as you move through the experiment. Now you'll have access, of course, to this through your phones most likely during the lab, and that's perfectly okay, but you need to be able to abbreviate it in order to use just your notebook in the laboratory. Now the second thing we want to do is, after we've reviewed the course or the documents that we find online, is start the handwritten portion. Again, as I indicated, you want to fill out the red items from the format sheet that you saw and do it in that order. And a point value is awarded for each section that is actually completed in its proper order. At the end of the procedural section in the document that you can download, you'll find a link to a video. You'll then want to watch it. So let me go back to the Fisher Esterification Lab And so here we're getting close to the end of the procedure, and you'll find the video link. If you click on it, it'll open up a YouTube video. This happens to be 25 minutes long, that has both lecture components and 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 also lab experimentation throughout. So I'm just running through it real quick to give you an idea. But this shows you the type of glassware and what to expect as you're moving through it. Now you want to be sure to watch that video. If you try to do the lab without watching the video, it'd basically be the same as trying to do an experiment without going to lecture. And this gives you the added benefit also of being able to see how it should turn out, so you know what to expect ahead of time. You then want to go and perform the lab and complete all the write-up format sheet items that are highlighted in bold, including the post-lab questions. Now, you don't have to necessarily do those during lab, you can do those afterwards, but there are certain things like calculations or values that you'll need to write down while you're in the lab. And then analyze the NMR that are provided, as well as the IR that you collect. Now, these, of course, do not have to be done during the lab. They should be done outside the lab. You could potentially do those at home or with the help of a TA on a Zoom meeting. Once you've finished all those items, then you submit it online on Learning Suite, and you don't submit the actual paperwork itself, but you're going to take quality images of each of the pages of your notebook, as well as any spectra that are associated with it, and then combine that into a single high quality document that you submit online. And then be sure to review that document before you're satisfied that you've submitted it, so that everything is legible. We've had several students in the past who have submitted assignments that were not legible enough. And if you do not want to be penalized for having to resubmit, then just simply check your work. This section on notebook protocol and lab write-ups really reiterates what we just got through talking about. But all the information collected during an experiment should be recorded in a notebook, not on loose pieces of paper or just done without recording whatsoever. It should be recorded in your notebook with the idea that someone could come behind you, use your notebook, and reproduce what you have done. Now, the initial experiments that you do may be a little longer than need be. We ordinarily want your lab write-ups to be about 2 to 3 pages in length. And so these first ones might be a little longer because you're going to feel the need to write more. But eventually you'll become more confident that you don't need to write as much, and they'll shrink down to that smaller length. But it's perfectly okay to use more pages. You won't be penalized for that. Now, the procedures for each lab will be available as we go, but they will become available to you on Learning Suite at least a week before they're performed, so that you, if you're getting ready early, and can do so. But we do some work on them in the background, and that's why we wait and give us that much time in order to make any changes that need be. Now, when you come to lab, the only thing that you need to bring is your notebook. There's no reason to bring the techniques manual or anything else. You probably have a phone if you have to refer to the video or even to the documents that are online, but you don't need to print those out, and we don't really want you to. Your notebook should be the only thing that you need. We mentioned that the procedure is abbreviated, so you don't need to copy it down word for word. You write it down in your own words. And it's a good idea, I think, to break it down into steps. Now, this might be a little awkward at first, so on Learning Suite, I have an example write-up that I think is a good one. Let's look at it now. It shows how a student did a good job of breaking down the procedure and the other elements. So it's under example write-up. Here we have, of course, it's all handwritten, and each of the items on the format sheet are listed here and highlighted and underlined. The table with their actual amounts are here, and so this is information they recorded as they were doing the lab. You'll notice here the procedure written on the left-hand column. This person broke what they were reading down into steps. They didn't write all the information down that they saw, but they condensed it. And as they went through the experiment, they wrote down observations that they saw. Okay, and then each lab has a title and all the pertinent information is filled out. Notice that eventually the conclusions were formed and the questions were addressed. We don't require you to write out the questions, but the answers. You could potentially write out the questions if you like, if you're using it as a reference. And then the spectra that were analyzed. This happens to be an IR one, and then the NMR. Now we'll talk about in the online lectures how to label these in a consistent pattern. But you want to do it not your own way, but the way that's described, so that you can clearly and efficiently communicate with whoever's grading it what you mean. Okay, but this lab write-up example is here for you, and it would be wise to look at it maybe the first few times you fill out a lab in order to make sure that you have the understood what it is you're supposed to do. Let's go back now to the notebook protocol. When we grade your lab notebooks, we'll be grading them for completeness, quality, and repeatability. Again, the 2 to 3 pages is just a suggestion. We're not going to penalize you for going above and beyond that, although it would be a little awkward if you try to do all this in 1 page. Now, you need to also realize that the due dates for these labs are indicated on the last page of this document, and we'll go over that schedule lastly, but you want to pay particular attention to that so that you know when things are due. It should be indicated clearly on Learning Suite as well, but the last page of the syllabus is a master document. All write-ups, all of them need to be completed in order to pass the course, even if you have an average that would allow you to have a passing grade otherwise. And that's because of safety reasons. So we don't have necessarily the opportunity to miss any. And so be aware that even if you're passing, if you don't have all of them completed, you won't be able to get a grade. There will be 2 exams associated with the class, a midterm and a final. The midterm will come at the end of the first block, and the final will happen at the end of the semester. Both of these exams will be administered and proctored online through Learning Suite. They will be both open book and open note. What that means is you're allowed to use the techniques manual. That's our course text. And open note, it means that you can use your notebook. Now, some of you will find that you can purchase the laboratory techniques manual as an ebook that we will allow you to use on an exam, but it is not open internet, and it's not open to anything else that's electronic. If you have some PowerPoint slides that you've downloaded from a TA review, those would not be appropriate, but your lab notebook, your own notebook, and then an ebook potentially would be allowed. Now the problems on both the midterm and the final are going to focus on application problems. So these are problems that you're going to be asked to solve that are directly related to each of the labs. In fact, the labs inspired all of the questions. As you're answering the questions, it might remind you of, hey, I think we addressed this in a particular lab, and you can go back to that lab and review it if you like in order to help answer the questions. You should expect to do well on a lab if you're doing a lab successfully and you know why you're doing the particular steps that you do. If, however, you're going into a lab, you're successful, but you really don't know why you're doing what you're doing, or you're depending on others a lot for analyzing the NMR spectra or the IR spectra and the like, you're going to find that you underperform on exams. So know why you're doing what you're doing, and then be prepared to apply that information. Now, as far as the course goes, there's often some misconceptions in terms of what is expected. Now, Chem 353 can be taken after, of course, 351 because that's a prerequisite, and even after you've taken Chem 352. But much of the information that we're trying to apply in the lab is information or principles that we've learned in classes like these. And so there's a significant amount of overlap. Our techniques manual really only covers a small amount of information that's not covered in these classes. And so we won't read the entire techniques manual. We'll be given assigned readings, and that will help us out. Now, in terms of the amount of time that you need to devote to getting ready to an experiment in the beginning, you'll probably end up devoting more time than in the end. In fact, you'll probably spend 2 or 3 hours getting ready for this first experiment. But I'd be surprised if you spent more than 15 or 20 minutes getting ready for an equivalent experiment that's further down the line. And that's just because you'll become more adept at understanding the process, and you'll see things that are techniques that are repeated, for example, and you won't need to write as much. Now, this lab has certain charges that are associated with it. Each student will pay a lab fee based on their activity in the lab, and so that averages around $35 when it's all said and done. The base fee is around $25, and so the difference is any items that you purchase that you need. If you're using more than is given to you, then it is perfectly fine. You can buy it, but it'll be charged to you. If you break anything and have to replace it, it is charged to your account. There's certain, and then we'll reconcile that as you check out. You'll be able to see those items that you've been charged, and you'll be asked to pay that through your university account after the class is over. Now, there's certain fees that you can avoid. If you leave your locker uncleaned, you don't check out at the end, it will be cleaned out for you, but that'll cost $30 in order for that to take place. So you want to be sure that you do check out on your own. If you lose the lock somehow, that'll be a $10 replacement fee. Of course, if you don't lose it, there's no reason to worry about that. And if you leave items out, like clamps or beakers or whatnot, you just forget and place it somewhere where you didn't notice, and then you leave, and then we collect it. We put it in a lost and found in the stock room, and you, once you figure out that it's missing, can get it out of lost and found for $1. So before you buy anything because you think you've lost it, be sure to ask about the lost and found. And then also be aware that if you break anything, you buy it. If you were to take your entire drawer full of glassware and break every item in it and have to replace it all, it'd be about $400 in order to do that. The highest fees that I've ever witnessed are probably around $100 or so. We really haven't had many instances where they're really beyond $35. So that's probably what you should expect. Now, as far as grading is concerned, we'll follow a standard grading scale. What I do in Learning Suite is calculate a weighted average for you. So the point values for each assignment or the exams or whatever's there really doesn't matter. They're all weighted. And for you to get an A, you need to break through the 93% threshold. And we'll follow a standard grading scale, as you can see listed here, for all the other grades that are assigned. Now, the work for the course is broken down into 3 areas for both the 1 and 2 credit students. 5% of it is introductory assignments. So this presentation you'll get credit for, that'll contribute to that, as well as a safety quiz. And then the lab work that you submit will be 55%, and each one of those experiments is equally weighted. With the 2 exams, they make up 40%, and they are also equally weighted. A 1 credit student will take the midterm as the only exam. It is 40% of their grade. Now, in terms of cheating, there are many ways to cheat, but um, my policy is if you cheat, you will receive a failing grade for the course. You're expected to turn in your own work and not work that is someone else's and represented as your own. So that's the basic idea. Um, if experiments do not work for you in the laboratory, though, we do have a way for you to get a sample from the stockroom and characterize that. The first time this happens to you, there will be no penalty. After that, there'll be a 2-point deduction from your final grade on each experiment. We do encourage you to be able to discuss procedures with others or to analyze spectra or even discuss assigned problems. Now, during this particular semester, that might be a little bit more challenging to be able to meet together, but you're really not competing against one another in this lab because you're going to need to, your grade is assigned using a standard grading scale, and there is no curve that I anticipate giving for the class. You're really competing against students from prior semesters. So feel free to discuss things. Of course, you really do want to know why things are happening. And if you work hard to do that, then you should do well in the class. And then we do not consider cooperation with other students to get the work done as cheating at all. So don't be worried about that. The safety statement in the syllabus is to help us understand some of the risks that are inherent with an organic chemistry lab. The chemicals that we use are mostly benign, but there is some risk involved. If you want to familiarize yourself in more detail with the risk involved with both starting material and products that we make, MSDS or SDS sheets are available in the laboratory. They may be more easily searched online just by simply searching a chemical name and MSDS or SDS afterwards. These sheets are prepared by manufacturers. A lot of the information is very rudimentary, and so we get the same type of information from chemical to chemical. You probably want to pay particular attention to parts of an SDS or MSDS sheet that refer to toxicity. Those values are actually determined in a laboratory and are potentially more reliable than the opinions of a manufacturer. Now, each student in the laboratory potentially exposes him or herself to chemicals by two basic means, and that's by either inhaling chemical fumes or by topical exposure. Now, we address inhalation in the laboratory by circulating the room or exhausting the room out of the building at a very rapid pace. And so the air within that room in which we'll be working is circulated, well, not circulated, but replaced every few minutes or so. The canopies and the side hoods help to accomplish this. To address topical exposure, we wear gloves when necessary in the laboratory, and that'll be indicated in the experiment documents that you read. And so we want to avoid exposure on the skin, mainly the hands. We want to avoid touching our faces. Of course, a face mask will probably preclude us from being able to do this in the first place. So our hands are probably the more important parts of our bodies where we could be exposed to chemicals that are introduced in the laboratory. Gloves mitigate this perfectly. Well, not perfectly, but are a good way in order to do it. Now, students are expected to follow safety directions and seek prompt medical attention if there's ever an experience of irritation that they think results from the coursework. There, again, are warnings that are associated with procedures. You should make yourself familiar with those and study them thoroughly and be aware before starting a lab of the risks that are involved. The online lectures also address these risks in order to keep us safe. Now, there are times as well where we'll ask questions on the exams that are related to these chemicals, so it would also benefit you in that regard. Now, in the laboratory, we're required to wear certain personal protective equipment, or PPEs. The lab coat and splash guard goggles that we mentioned earlier are required. A face mask is required for this particular semester at all times, even when you're done with your experiment, anytime you're in the building. Unless you're alone in an office, you will need to wear a face mask. Now, other things that we need to address are shoes and socks. We want to avoid having any bare skin below the neckline, so socks are a requirement. And good sturdy shoes, shoes that do not have holes in them, shoes that can protect your feet in case chemicals fall from the bench top onto them and you do not notice. Now, we should also be cognizant of the jewelry that we wear. If chemicals, especially liquid chemicals, are to get underneath jewelry, that can sometimes irritate the skin. And if you have long hair, that needs to be confined while working in a chemical laboratory. Now, gloves aren't mandatory for all experiments. There are some that are considered so benign that we don't necessarily need them. If you choose to wear gloves, that's perfectly fine. Gloves are available in the laboratory for you to wear at all times if you so choose. Many chemists, though, don't wear gloves 100% of the time that they're in a laboratory, but they do wear them whenever they're working with chemicals they consider maybe corrosive or are acutely active, like strong acids or strong bases, or when they're working with toxic chemicals. So to some degree, we're allowing you to decide when you're wearing gloves for those labs that involve fairly benign substances. Now, this safety statement you want to read through carefully. One of the questions on the safety quiz will ask you if you have read it, and it's simply a yes/no question, so you want to be able to honestly answer yes to that. Now, these other policies here are university policies about the honor code and such, and so you can read through those. If you have any issues related to this, there are contact numbers and links that are provided. Now that takes care of the entire body of the syllabus except for the last page, which is the universal schedule. This part of the syllabus you want to refer to often. You'll see that what we have listed here is a table of all of the sections that are currently taking Chem 353 for this semester. So we have 353 and 1 through 8 sections in Chem 354, which is one section. Each of the rows indicates a week of the semester up through the final. And then listed here on the top line of a particular week are the labs or the assignments that we are performing. So here the first day of the semester on August 31st, we don't have any labs, but we will be doing this introductory video, so you'll be expected to watch this video and then submit it as an assignment. So that is why it's listed down below as a submission. Now, the second day of lab, we will be performing the check-in. So we've postponed that a little bit, one day more than we ordinarily do. We ordinarily check in on the first day, but because of the chaos that will probably take place this first week, I decided to postpone it a day in order to give us a little bit more time to sort things out and to orient ourselves. Now, the Friday sections have a little bit different outline of what they're going to do. They are able to watch the introductory video earlier in the week as well, but they'll check in on the very first day of their labs, and their instructors will be reaching out to them as well. Notice that Those sections that meet on Monday and Wednesday are highlighted in yellow. The Friday sections are highlighted in green, and then the Tuesday, Thursday sections are not highlighted at all. Here on, it looks like November 24th, you'll notice that the Friday section will meet in the place of those sections that would have met on Tuesday, and that's to make up for the holiday that appears earlier in the schedule. And so this document here, along with its legend, really tells us everything we need to know about what we're going to do in the lab and when it's due. So if, for example, you are in section 1 or section 8, you would watch the introductory video on Monday, submit that assignment, and then plan on coming to lab at your designated time on Wednesday in order to check in. And then it looks like we have a holiday the following Monday, so you catch a break. And then Wednesday, looks like September 9th, you're scheduled to start the Fisher Esterification Lab. Also notice that the safety quiz is opened earlier in the week on September 4th and closes on September 18th. And so you can take that through Learning Suite at any time. It's an open book quiz. You can go to that assignment and there's some explanation in Learning Suite about it. It's not designed to be difficult at all, but it's really a contract between us that you understand some of the safety issues in the lab. So if you're taking that quiz, and it's a multiple choice format, but if you're taking it and you think any of the questions are particularly challenging, just slow down a little bit and think of it as an easy question, and none of the questions are meant to be deceptive in any way. And you actually need to get 100% on that quiz in order to pass the class, and so you can retake that as many times as you need to. Okay, so back to this Monday, Wednesday section. They start the Fisher Esterification Lab here on it looks like September 9th, and they don't finish it then. They actually carry it over through to the 14th, so they get 6 hours to work on that. And again, there's an online video, so the lecture part is included in that, so you'll simply come to lab ready to go. And then they'll start the reduction of a ketone lab in their following experience. But the Fisher Esterification Lab isn't due the day they finish it in lab. The write-up is actually due a week later. So you get quite a bit of time, a little bit of buffer, so that you can prepare and analyze the spectra and be sure what you're doing. But after that, things start to become due at a pretty good clip. But again, you want to pay very close attention to this, all the dates that you'll need, and when the midterm is online, and the classes that are not held, or when there isn't it's all listed here. Now this is duplicated in Learning Suite and it's scheduled, but I use this as our master schedule, so you want to refer to it liberally. Now we can talk about how to check into the lab in a safe manner. The organic labs are held in the central wing on the first floor of the Benson building that you can see here in this image. Now each of you will need to go and find C171 in the Benson building and the most south entrance. That door will be open on the first day of check-in, and on it will be posted a map of the 2 potential rooms where you'll find your assigned drawer. Below that map, we'll have a roster, or maybe even more than one, listed. If you are enrolled in the class, you simply find your section, your last name, and to the right, you'll find a tear-off slip that you can use in order to get into your pre-assigned drawer. The station that you'll be working at during the semester is pre-assigned. So what we would like you to do is come to this door, but we don't want all the students to congregate around the door at their section's given start time. What we would like you to do is come in a staggered way. And we'll do this by determining when you should show up using your last name. If you'll use this table to determine how many minutes to add to your section start time will allow students to come in potentially one at a time without having an issue social distancing. So if your last name is Bronson, as mine is, and your section normally would start at 8 a.m., if you add 2 minutes to the time that you will arrive and come in at 8:02, tear off your locker combination, and then enter the appropriate lab, you can then start the check-in. And likewise, if you have a name that starts with Z, we'll add 50 minutes to your name. So you'll come in at 8:50, tear off the appropriate combination, and do the same. Now you'll notice on the door that some of the room numbers are different. The top half ends up in C171, and the bottom half ends up in C189. Where you're tearing off your locker combination is on the far south end of the two labs. And so the first set of students will just simply enter the lab in C171, but the bottom half will need to wander down the hall to the other entrance and enter C189 in order to find their drawer and start checking. So do not be confused by the fact that the locker combinations will only be located on one centralized door. Now, one thing I want to talk about now is that you'll notice on our sign-in sheet, I have the number of credits that each student is signed up for highlighted. And I've bolded the 1 credit students in red. I do this because there tends to be many 1 credit students who have signed up for the 1 credit erroneously, and we need to make this correction before the add drop deadline to make it a smooth process. So confirm that you do in fact need 1 credit. If you're going to medical school, for example, or you want to, you will need to do it for 2 credits. But it's perfectly okay to take it for 1 credit if that's what you need. Those students that do will be taking it as a block, and so the midterm in the middle of the semester will be their final, and then they can check out and be done, and they'll get a grade. If it turns out that you need to change from 1 to 2 credits, or even from 2 to 1 credit, we can do this before the add drop deadline. Just email me, and I'll give you an add code in order to do this. So once you have your locker combination, go into the appropriate lab and find the locker that's listed on the slip that you've torn off. Your job will be, after opening it, to take out each of the items and find the check-in form. Now the check-in form isn't necessarily in the drawer. It'll be somewhere in the lab, and the stockroom assistant or TA can direct you towards it. But you want to verify that each of the items in the drawer is clean. So if there's anything that you need to, that looks dirty, you want to do that in the sink with soap and water. You'll also need to replace any items that are obviously damaged, like a cracked vial or broken beaker. Sometimes if you aren't clear whether or not it's got a crack, you need to hold it up to the light, and cracks can show themselves. If you have any questions, you can talk to a TA. Now this doesn't mean that all of the items in your drawer need to be pristine. There will be some wear and tear on some of the items, and they may be usable. So if you end up taking an item that you can see obvious wear and tear on, but you believe it's still usable, just simply make a note next to that item on the check-in form that it has maybe a little bit of wear on it. And if for some reason it propagates a crack from that portion, then we will give you a discount, if maybe not charge you at all for that type of damage. But we don't want to throw out items that are still usable even though they have some wear on them. So the first day of check-in, there will be no charges incurred at all for any replacement items. All of the items in the drawer should be intact. Somebody else went to the trouble to make sure that they were all there, but we do find that there is occasion where some items are missing. So today, or the first day that you check in, there will be no charge. After that, though, if you find that you're missing something or something is broken, it'll be your responsibility, at least at the December checkout. Now, if your drawer doesn't have everything that's listed on the check-in form, it may be okay. There are some items that are doubled up to account for maybe beakers. The 5 ml beaker is no longer an item that we use, but many of the drawers do have them. It's still listed on the check-in form. And so some drawers will have two 10 ml beakers to make up for the fact that they don't have a 5 ml beaker. Just simply make a note that you have two and that you don't have the 5, and that'll be okay. You don't need to be concerned about that at all. In the lab, we have a display case that lists each of the items that should be in your drawer along with its name, because sometimes we can read the name on the list and not be familiar enough with it to identify the piece in the drawer. And so this can be a great aid to help you speed through the check-in process. Now, once you've finished checking in and you're satisfied that all the equipment is in good condition, and you've marked your check-in form accordingly, you want to keep that in your drawer in a safe place. A good place to put it is underneath the plastic container that holds much of the glassware. You just simply slide it underneath. Now, we need that form in December when you will be checking out. The TA will sign the bottom portion and leave that in the drawer, verifying that everything was in good condition, and you'll use the top portion to check out of the lab. At this point, you're done with the check-in process. You put the lock back on your drawer to secure it, and wipe down your station. Find the spray bottles that will be located throughout the lab and the paper towel dispensers so that after spraying down, you can wipe up your area. Both the glass that surrounds the canopy in front of your station, any of the equipment that you use, and of course the countertop. This helps ensure that the next student is coming into an environment that they can be confident is clean and free of any, not only chemical contamination, but contamination due to COVID-19. To get credit for this assignment or for viewing the introductory presentation, go back now in the video to the portion where it showed you how to determine what time you should show up for check-in on your assigned day. Then take an image of the screen and an image of yourself and submit those two images as a single document on Learning Suite, and you'll get credit for having completed this introductory presentation.